it's a new platform for me, not Zoom, but this type of platform. So I want to make sure that I'm clear with how we're proceeding this evening. So thank you for taking some time to come out and have, first and foremost, me present some information with regard to the fall reopening, give you an update as to what's happening at the state level, also what's happening locally with regard to a task force that I've created. I'll explain that piece of it. Numerous questions came in. Thank you so much for those questions. And hopefully I'll be able to answer most of it. I'll be clear, we are streaming this through WACA, and I am about to hit record, so we can keep this as a live version or a taped version for folks who can't make it tonight. So I am about to do that, just so we are clear. Secondly, you'll notice there's a question and answer column. And what I would ask that you do is, if you have a question throughout the evening, please post it here. And for those folks that see a question and it's something of interest to them, there's a thumb that you can click on. And what that does is automatically move our questions up to the top. So to make sure that the most pressing questions are answered throughout the night, we'll be able to then, do a little bit of triage, and so we're not repeating things if we don't have to. And secondly, I'm going to open up a poll. I'd like to just know where most folks are coming into, whether it's a community member or one of the schools. So I'll launch that, and I will go from there. So that'll be pretty much the format. Hopefully you'll find some of the information useful, and we can go from there. Couple thumbs up to let me know that we're good to go on that. I see a few. So awesome. Thank you. So I will lower it again and close the participant list. Great. And I'm going to open up the poll as well. Ms. Bennett is helping me this evening with reviewing the questions to make sure that if there are things I've missed, we'll go from there. But again, I'm going to start with really high level overview and walk you through what we're doing as a district, then obviously open up for some questions and answers. I will start by saying we do not have definitive plans, and there's a good reason for that. A lot of what we are working through is contingent upon the state level decision makers. That includes the Commissioner of Education, that includes the Department of Public Health, and also includes the Governor's Office. So much of what I will talk about tonight, you'll find that there may be some vagueness, and I'm not doing that intentionally. I'm doing that because we don't have answers. And hopefully, as we get through the night, you'll understand more of the nuances that we are dealing with. So again, thank you for taking some time to come out this evening. We will be hosting another forum tomorrow morning and on Thursday morning, and then probably next week or the week after, when we get some really definitive guidance coming out of the Commissioner's Office. But that being said, as you know, it's been a trying time through the COVID-19 pandemic for all of us. Thank you to the parents, the teachers, the students. It's been, not one of us could have imagined that we would be forced to take the learning outside of our brick and mortar and out of our buildings for what accounts to about 63 days. And it's been a challenge, to say the least, for all of you. It's been a challenge for our students, and it's certainly been a challenge for our educators. And we will move forward with, the plans as they come available. So here's where we are. In the spring, when we had to start implementing remote learning, the commissioner certainly was focused on making sure that we were taking care of the social emotional well-being of all of our students and our faculty and our staff, and understanding that a lot of trauma would be certainly coming forth out of this. And there were a couple pivots, and the most recent pivot at the end of March, early April, was to focus a little bit more on content standards. Yet still, not every district across the Commonwealth was able to do that, and or was willing to do that. We recognize, and I recognize, that it was all over the map in Ashland as well. And in terms of what some teachers were doing, what other teachers, compared to what other teachers were doing, as well as across districts. So we were certainly putting a good faith effort towards what the commissioner was recommending that we do for the remainder of this year. But we're at a point now where we've got to stop, and we've got to think about the fall of 2020 into the spring of 2021. So with that being said, I pulled together a task force of about 40 individuals, and the task force at this point in time is being defined as those individuals who are educators within the buildings, are administrators, they are parent volunteers who have been elected through site councils. So we do have parent representation, but they're through the site council membership. We have representation for our ASH PACs, which is our special education PAC. We have representation from the Board of Health, first responders within the community, as well as a couple community members. That being said, I kept it to this group to really focus on a number of areas to set a framework, if you will, to help guide each of our schools as we go through a process of figuring out how we open up the buildings, and for in-person live learning, which is what we all want and what we're all working towards being able to provide for our students and for our faculty. There's nothing more than our faculty wants than to be in the buildings working with your kids. And that's been loud and clear. The commissioner, however, put out a statement a couple of weeks ago looking at four areas. And I'll also repeat this. Some of these questions that came in, I will actually do a hard copy on our website with answers as well. So there'll be a running tally of these questions and a narrative. So if people want to go back and look at that. So he looked at four areas from his office, and one is teaching and learning. Two was physical and virtual learning environments, so outside of the brick and mortar and inside the brick and mortar. Operations and business services, so thinking about transportation, thinking about cafeteria, nutrition services, things of that nature. As well as you can tell, our commissioner has been keenly focused on behavioral health and social and emotional well-being and social and emotional learning. And those are the four areas that he will address in 2 weeks. So mid-June, there will be some direct guidance coming out of the commissioner's office as to what schools will and should look like for the fall of 2020. This being said, it's the first time. Today we had a meeting with the commissioner, and he was very adamant that this will be a very a prescriptive process. Unlike the guidance and recommendations of the remote learning, he is, adamant that all districts are going to look, the majority, 85 to 90% of the districts are going to look the same. So there's not this comparison between Ashland, Hopkinton, Holliston, Dover, Sherborne, Franklin, et cetera, right? So that there's going to be an opportunity for a consistent approach across the Commonwealth, with the understanding that there are some areas, some communities that have may have high COVID numbers still, where they're going to have to be flexible, and there'll be a waiver process that districts can eventually, ask the Department of Ed to waive, whether it's going further with standards and or reducing some of the learning. What he's looking at is a hybrid model. And what I would say is, I can't describe to you what that hybrid model looks like because we haven't seen it. Think of it as the potential for, if we're looking at social distancing or physical distancing within the schools, half of the kids at a time in a building. So maybe it's and again, I want to be clear, this is not what we're doing, and or I have not seen the recommendations coming from the commissioner. just giving you an idea of what it could look like. It could be 1 week a group is in school, and so half the population's in school and the other half is remote learning, and then it flips weekly. That is a realistic possibility that the commissioner will be looking at and sharing with superintendents in communities in a draft form in mid-June. The reason why I started having the task force, reopening task force for Ashland, we've met, and tomorrow, Thursday will be our 4th meeting, is that we need to be ahead of it. We need to be thinking about all of the questions that you have asked, all of the questions that we have as a community, and see if we have those answers, and then be able to plug those into the requirements that the Department of Ed will be sending to us in mid-June. So as that occurs, what do we do and how do we approach it? What happens in the summer? There were lots of questions about summer extended school year programming for our unique learners, and what does that look like? Are we going to be able to open the buildings and have in-person instruction? And at this point in time, we do not have guidance from the Department of Ed yet. That we hope will be out in the next 2 days, but it appears that we'll start with remote learning for the extended school year, and then hopefully by August we have an opportunity to pull kids into the schools in small groups, and to be able to identify, we run Title I camps for students who need additional supports in math and ELA, and hopefully by August we can get those kids into our buildings and provide them with the opportunity to learn with live instruction versus remote. So that's really a grand overview. Transportation, all of these are concerns. So I'm going to go through the list of questions and answer these for you, and hopefully it'll get a little clearer. And then I'll pause, allow you to get some things settled in your own mind, and that way we can answer the questions that are popping up in the Q&A section. So let me just go through this. So I'm really curious about summer learning for those on IEPs and what school will look like in the fall. Again, as I stated, we're in the process of waiting for guidance from the commissioner's office with regard to opening, a soft opening, if you will, for our extended school year programs in our buildings for our students on IEPs. That we hope we'll have in the next 2 days, and we will be able to cipher through it and figure out what's the best approach. But at this point in time, Kathy Silva, our Director of Student Services, is viewing the beginning of our extended year programs as going to be remote to start with. Can we have access to the homeschooling resources throughout the summer, the extra math? Yes, we will make sure that we can provide additional supports for families should they want to continue working with those programs. Absolutely. What is the precise criteria used to determine when schools can go back 100% to normal? It can feel like this lockdown is indefinite because it's unclear exactly what has to happen to go back to normal. And what I can tell you is we need to follow the DPH, the Department of Public Health guidelines, as well as the commissioner's guidelines and the governor's guidelines. We don't have the flexibility to say in Ashland, we are just going to open. There are so many moving parts that we need to allow the state level to dictate, overall what it will look like, and then we'll have an opportunity to modify it within Ashland and what meets our needs in our 5 schools and how that is going to look. If you do not anticipate a return to the traditional school day at schools physically, how can APS incorporate more face-to-face time with teachers and students? The current model leaves most of the structure of the day up to families, which is a significant challenge. Why has there not been more Zoom options for classes? My daughters have had a few options for this. Again, I can tell you definitively that we need to move to a single platform, if you will. So that being said, looking at whether it's the Google Meets and the Google Classroom, that there's consistency across all buildings and across all teachers. That is something we will be focused on this summer as professional development for our teaching staff. When we got thrust into, in March, into the remote learning, you can just imagine the diverse nature of skill sets amongst our staff. Some people felt really comfortable hosting a Zoom. Some did not. Some didn't even know what Zoom was. Some had never experienced Google Classroom. So these things we've learned a great deal, and we need to be better at it. And we will focus this summer on getting our teachers prepared for the hybrid model, if you will, or if we have to shut down our schools again to go into remote learning, that it's more robust, that it is absolutely, the commissioner has looked at synchronous and asynchronous, it's a tough word for me at times, asynchronous learning. So live sessions and or tape sessions. The tape sessions is where he really wanted us to focus, because the ability, every family is different and every child is different at home, and whether they have the flexibility. We have essential employees, if you will, who are working in the hospitals, and older siblings are watching younger siblings, so they can't attend all of the meetings. And the one thing the commissioner wanted to make sure that we were focused on was equity of access, and that if you can tape a lesson, do that. The in-person was about connections and was about making sure that we're checking on the social emotional well-being of our students. And that's important. Yes, there certainly will be gaps in the academic component, and we recognize that, and that's the next phase for us, is how do we close those gaps? Will parents be given an option of 100% remote learning if there's a decision that students can return even part-time to classes, or will it be up to the parent to homeschool at that point? That's a great question. We will be looking at all options for our families. We recognize, and I recognize, that there will be families and there'll be educators who feel uncomfortable coming back into the schools until there's a vaccine available. And we have to take that into account, and we will continue to take that into account. The commissioner is taking that into account. And what I would say is there's going to be a survey that will be coming out to the district probably in the next week, where we will be asking your feedback on whether you expect to send your child back to school, physical learning, if you're thinking of anticipating using transportation, as well as what your plans are in the future with your children. So we get an idea of, if 20% of our families say, listen, we're not going back, we need only remote learning for our children. What does it look like cross section for grades? Obviously, it's probably easier to create remote learning for high school students than it is elementary students. And how does that look? We recognize the fact that we need to have schools so families can get back to work. We recognize that, but we can't make that sole determinant in Ashland. We are being driven by the data and the science as given to us at the state level. So look for that survey coming out. So to answer that question, yeah, we anticipate there will be some families that will need 100% remote learning, and we will work within our design to make that possible. But understanding it will be more robust. It will be, we will go back to the grading, the credit, no credit piece that, again, the commissioner wanted us to focus on during the spring. We will be moving back to assessments and grading. And that's where some professional development with our staff needs to take place. So he made it clear that today, the commissioner did, that he expects us to go back to the grading component. Seems like some sort of split will happen, meaning Group A will go, yeah, that's the hybrid piece. Like I said, I can't guarantee you exactly what the hybrid piece will look like until the commissioner comes out with that information in the next 2 weeks. If they're going to be half-day schools, will there be a way to ensure that families with more than one child can have their children in school the same half of the day to allow parents to work? Yeah, this is going to be a scheduling nightmare. As a former high school principal and assistant principal who had to schedule for 800 students, many of the parents who have children and trying to take singleton like AP classes and want to take 5 AP classes, it's a nightmare just doing schedules to begin with. It's not simple. It's complex with transportation. It's complex with the types of classes that we take. If you've got a child at the high school and one, say, at Warren, a split in terms of that age, what does that look like, and how many of those students can we identify? We will do our best to ensure that we are meeting the demand of our parents as best we can. I want to be perfectly clear. We're not going to find a model that is perfect. We're not going to find a model that suits every one of your needs or the 2,900 students of Ashland. We're going to do our best, and we will follow, again, the guidance that we get from the commissioner's office. Yeah, there are a number of questions that relate to students with medical concerns, and what does that look like in terms of how do we get snacks if a student has to get insulin, they visit the nurse often, what are those protocols going to be? Our nurses are part of the reopening task force, and they are being led by the Department of Public Health and their organizations in terms of what are the best protocols and practices. And again, it will look different, right? It'll look different at the high school than it does at the Warren School, than it does at the Pitaway School. So their voice is being heard and will be a part of any decisions that come forth in terms of the rollout of letting kids back in. Our sons will be a senior at the high school. We're very concerned about college readiness. If there's a hybrid model, will they be academically prepared and ready for college? Will grades continue to resume or be pass-fail? As I stated, the anticipation is we will go back to grading. The pass-fail was what the commissioner, the credit, no credit, pass-fail was what the commissioner wanted us to focus on this spring. Will students have a chance to improve their GPA? The answer is most likely. If we're with grades, then their GPAs are going to be recalculated. That, again, a lot of this conversation is a framework, and each building level will have their own opening task force where they will answer some of these very specific questions to the children in their buildings. If someone is tested positive in the school community for coronavirus, what will the next required steps be for the schools? Another great question. We will follow the guidance of the local Board of Health, the Department of Public Health, and the guidance, again, from the commissioner's office. They will have this outlined for us. If the contact tracing you hear so much about is going to be critical. How are we going to find a plan that works in Ashland so we can trace our students and find out who they've been next to? Smaller numbers in the classes, if we're splitting them up, certainly will help us with that. Their recommendations will be to continue to isolate small groups. So have the small groups be with one another versus continuing to have larger groups. So you might, if you think of some of our middle school classes at 28, 29, we will not be seeing that for a while. And they will not be interchanging classes with other kids because what the state and the Department of Public Health wants us to do is they want us to be able to quickly and accurately identify folks who've been in contact with someone who may have had coronavirus. Is it possible we will have to shut down for a period of time? The answer is yes, right? Depending upon how many students or the impact, absolutely. But again, this is not done in isolation by the school system. It is done in conjunction with local Board of Health and the Department of Public Health. Most of our decisions are based on the data and the recommendations coming from those organizations. This is not about the superintendent of schools or the school committee making these decisions. It's based on recommendations of those organizations. Do I think the preschool will be available to open in the fall? Again, that guidance will be forthcoming. We hope. We see the challenges with all students wearing masks, especially young kids, and touching their face and pulling the mask off, and what are we going to do, and how we're going to approach this. We've talked a lot about making some videos for families and to share with students, and about proper hygiene, use of masks, things of that nature. Yeah, music, lunch, recess, rest time. Again, I will let Sarah Davidson and the folks at Pitaway work to design very specific to these questions, what it will look like. How much will be decided now versus waiting or being flexible to change school as it approaches. The commissioner again today was focused on, here are some plans coming out in mid-June, but guess what? In mid-August, we could be in a very different state. And if we're in a very different state, we have to be flexible enough to change that. What if larger groups are allowed, and we decide that we can expand the number of students in the school system? We have to be willing and able to do that. So to the question specifically, we will be as flexible, and we will change based on the guidance that we continue to receive. And that's all we can do. My goal is with this, I want to continue to get the information out to you as early as possible. I think the community deserves that. I think parents are anxious, students are anxious. What is it going to look like? And I can't give you definitive answers tonight. I can tell you that we are working towards answering all of these questions and many, many more. So athletics, that's an MIAA decision. We have not heard anything with regard to fall sports at the high school level. What I have read recently, however, is that there will be a focus on potential sports that do not have, that are innately made for social distancing, golf, cross country, things of that nature, but sports that are, where there's close contact, there's large groups, football, soccer, field hockey, there's potential that those sports may not go off as planned right now, but that is being discussed at the MIAA in conjunction with the Commissioner of Education. So we hope to hear more about that also by mid-June. As you know, they're starting to allow some youth sports, limited youth sports to occur, and we'll see how that goes. And I think that will help guide the state level in terms of their recommendations for us. The major component with athletics, but it also is with regard to just being in school, is transportation. And the transportation is a great concern to me. We have 19 buses currently transporting between 1,600 and 1,800 students a day, depending upon athletics and drop-offs and things of that nature. And to social distance on a bus, it looks like if you follow the guidelines of the CDC, which I think are really strict, and if you were to ask me, hey, if we follow these, would we ever open school again? I'd say probably not. So I struggle with a lot of their guidance. But if we're talking 14 or 15 students on a school bus, we would conceivably need to double, if not triple, the number of buses that we are running in the town of Ashland in order to transport our students to the schools in a way that allows for people to be on time. So you could have a Mendez run, for instance, 15 kids, but there's 30 that typically might be on that bus, or 40. So now we've got to make 3 runs, and they're coming in at different times. And what does that do to the start of the day? What does it do to the length of the day in terms of getting kids home after school? So those are all things we're considering and talking about, and that's going to be part of the survey to the community. Is, are you anticipating taking the bus? And if so, what are some concerns? But what are we doing to help mitigate your concerns in terms of the social distancing on the busing? And again, Commissioner today did talk about transportation and said there'll be guidance coming through. He thinks the number 12 is too low to allow for students on buses. And to put it in perspective, it's about $79,000 a bus per year. So round it up to 80 and add 40 more buses, and we're looking at $3.2 million, somewhere around there, to add for busing, which, from a budgetary standpoint, we just don't have those funds. If in-person school can convene, will Mendez Choir High School Band still be held, given the connection between singing deep exhalation during wind instrument practice and the spread of coronavirus droplets, right? So we are committed in this district, and I am committed in this district, to ensure our arts, our unified arts, our music programs, our health and wellness programs are continuing to run. We understand, and I understand and recognize that the social emotional toll and the trauma that is occurring with our students right now is real, and with our staff and with our parents. We need to have outlets, and just focusing on a core content school system will do no good service to our students and our families. We need kids to be healthy. They need to exercise. They need to participate in band and chorus. But that being said, how do we do it safely? And how do we do it in such a way that allows for students to participate, whether it's hosting, an online choir practice, so you have all your students there and a teacher can go through that and work. That'd be great. So we will continue to look at all of those options for our students, but we are committed in this district to keeping our arts programs and our music programs, because I'm a firm believer that those skills certainly are not only great for our kids, but they help with their academics as well. I will have 2 kids at Warren next year. If there's a staggered schedule, will it be possible to attempt to have all kids in one household attending the same days? Absolutely. Again, it's the scheduling nightmare, but that will be our intent. And we've got to be cognizant of the fact that not all families have the same last name. So we've got to know our kids, and we've got to know what that looks like with our blended families. Who's on the task force? I mentioned that. I don't have any minutes for the meetings. I certainly can share out with the community some of the things we're discussing. One of the recommendations is in my weekly email to send one of these questions and highlight what the task force has looked at. So I'll start doing that. And hopefully you'll get a flavor for the work that's being done. Again, we're meeting just weekly for about an hour and a half and going through those 4 areas that I mentioned at the beginning, and hopefully they will fall in alignment with what the commissioner is going to recommend. Curious about summer learning for IEPs. I mentioned that. If there's a chance for all students not attending school full day every day, what will it look like for families with 2 working parents, right? Again, I want to be very clear. We are struggling with trying to figure out how this works. Schools need to open, daycares need to open, so folks can get back to work. That's the bottom line, right? We are a conduit for families in order to work, and we want the schools to be open so you can go back to work. But it has to be done in a safe, methodical manner with respect to the guidance and direction at the state level. Has the town considered double sessions back in the 60s? Yeah, we're considering double sessions. We're considering half days. We're considering opening the whole building. All of those are options that we're considering. But once again, the guidance from the commissioner will direct us. What is the plan for Title I? We're looking at Title I camps possibly in August. We would like to figure out a way in August, the last week or 2, to allow kids to be back in the building to work on some transitioning back into the system. We recognize the fact that kids need to be in the schools, and they need to feel a part of the schools. We have kids going from Mendez to the middle to the high school. How do we get them in? How do we provide some opportunities for them to become attached and to the new building? So we are certainly looking at that. I'm reluctant to send my daughter to school as there's no vaccine. I get it, and that's where the survey will be very helpful to us to determine, okay, if 20% of the high school students and families are saying we're not sending our kids back, and of that 20%, 60% are freshmen. Now we've got to focus on the freshman educators and what that looks like and how we can create remote learning. So it's not just as simple as saying, the high school is going to do remote learning or Mendez is going to do remote learning. If the majority of the kids in the fourth grade are going to come for physical learning, then the fourth grade teachers will be focused on that piece, et cetera. Can we expect a more routine 8 to 2 classes every day? Again, the virus and guidance will lead us down this road. Question, should students return to school in September? I'll tell you right now, I have a 9th grader and a 7th grader, and my wife is an educator. We're in 4 separate school districts, and each one of them has done very different things. But my kids will be going back to school. They will, if there is an opportunity for them to be in the buildings learning, that's where they're going. So we hope we can provide that opportunity for our kids in Ashland as well. In light of the fact that COVID-19 is less dangerous to children with rare exceptions, and children appear less likely to transmit it, is the task force considering having children return full-time in the fall with options for families to keep any child falling within the vulnerable population's home? It's always going to be within the purview of families to keep their children home. And I'll be clear too. We have numerous faculty who have underlying conditions as well, and they're concerned for their own health and well-being. And we're going to have to deal with that from an infrastructure standpoint, from a school. So that's why that survey is going to be critically important. I think we're still learning so much about the virus. I'm not a doctor, an epidemiologist, so I'm not going to sit here and say definitively that children can't or are less likely to transmit. I mean, we do know that they're less likely to show symptoms, but that doesn't mean they can't transmit. I don't know that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend to know that. We will continue to take the advice from those in the field. I agree 100%. Remote learning is not equivalent to in-school learning, and we need to get back to that. But that being said, we also need to step up the game for the remote learning. We recognize that, and that will be a focus of the summer to ensure that we're ready to be more robust and to present opportunities for our students more than we did in the spring. That is something that we will be focused on. Sports, I answered that one before. Will there be traditional events be offered in the fall, for example, a fall field day? Again, all of these are really critical questions. We don't know what we're going to do in terms of be allowed to have in terms of the number of kids or members congregating together. So we will continue to monitor that and adjust it as necessary. There's been a couple questions in here on social emotional learning. Jen Cutler, as you know, or many of you may not, we do have a director of counseling and social emotional learning, and the school committee has been dedicated in my 11 years here in this community and 6 as superintendent, focused on social emotional well-being of our kids and our staff in our community. And Jen has working with a number of organizations to create professional development for our staff over the summer, whether it's trauma-informed SEL, social emotional learning. The Search Institute is offering some virtual professional development where they're creating frameworks to develop better relationships with staff and kids so we can identify them. There's a comprehensive school mental health opportunity for a grant where we'll be applying for that, but it looks like they're only giving out 6 across the Commonwealth. And we will continue to work through that. Building specific guidelines will be created through her office with the counseling staffs. Again, we do recognize the fact that there's trauma that exists and is being created every single day. We are not in school, and we want to make sure that our teachers are prepared to work with our students in addressing those problems. Those are the questions. And I apologize, if I went too quick. I will post them online with answers narratively as well. So there are some questions that have been popping up over here, and I want to address these as well. Ms. Bennett, it looks like people have been putting their thumbs up, so I can read them and answer them, and then we can delete them. Does that work for you?
Works for me.
Right. Okay. Will you be checking? And I'm just again, if you read a question on the Q&A and you see the thumbs up sign, if you click on it, it'll automatically push it to the next, indicate it's one of the most important questions. Jim, please answer. So will you be checking each student and staff's vitals every day in school? Great question. Our nurses are heavily involved again with the reopening plan. Vitals, there's a lot of debate on this right now. We have a lot of students and families who may not exhibit any temperature, like increased temperature or fever. And what does that look like? So the guidance with regard to, are we checking temperatures, asking students certain questions, what's the enormity of that, versus saying, hey, you know what, families, let's take some responsibility at home as well. If your kid does not feel well, if your kid has showing any signs or symptoms, keep them home and report that to us. When a student might show some symptoms and or has a spike in a fever during the day, what are we doing in the nursing suite? We're looking at creating separate rooms to quarantine within those rooms, within a school, so we can keep kids separate if someone's showing some symptoms. That stuff, those are details that will be worked out with our nursing staff and head nurse, Audrey LaCroix. Our nursing staff is phenomenal. We're very fortunate in Ashland, the amount of nurses we actually have on staff. We have, for the most part, almost 1.5 to 2 nurses in each building every day. That's pretty impressive. I do see us having to potentially increase costs around health services, nursing, as well as our custodial maintenance services in terms of the cleaning and the continued disinfecting of our buildings after kids leave, teachers leave, things of that nature. Jim, in a half and half scenario, knowing a lot of teachers are parents as well, right? How do we support our teachers who will be full-time while their own children are half and half? We'll need our teachers attentive to the kids more so than ever in the fall, and it'll be tough to support them on that if they're struggling how to be there for their own children. Yeah, I had this conversation with our teachers. I meet Monday nights with our entire teaching staff, and we talk about lots of things. And this came up the other night. We've got numerous teachers who have young kids, and their districts are doing something very different that they live in compared to what we're doing. Again, it goes back to the commissioner being thoughtful that if there's consistency across all districts in how we approach the fall, there's less likely to be, 1, comparison between districts, and 2, an opportunity for our teachers who do have children to be able to have a similar schedule. And will we work with those families of teachers to potentially have remote learning or flexible schedules? Sure. So it's a challenge. It's a great question, and our staff has been talking about that as well. Will you, in that case, allow canceling the bus registration? We pay for the bus, and if the distancing cannot be maintained, then we would need to cancel the registration and arrange for a drop-off. Yeah, that's a good question, and that will be decided certainly in the coming weeks. But if you've decided not to use it, yes, we could cancel the bus registration, and we'll work through that. Are there discussions happening with DPH or other authorities about any tests available or screenings to be in place for teachers and students before school starts and after school resumes? I wish I could say that we are on the front line of getting testing, but there's been zero discussion on that at this point. And it will be interesting. I think I thought a lot about our teachers and our vulnerable teachers and getting tests. The governor, I think today, said he hopes by the fall, this was either yesterday or today, that there's 45,000 tests a day available. Seems kind of an interesting, large number, but I think I heard him correctly. So the whole ramping up of testing certainly will be something that will guide the direction out of the State House as well as the Commissioner of Education. Is there going to be a mechanism for tracking students whose family members might be exposed to the virus and are quarantining at home? Yeah, that will be in conjunction with our local Board of Health. And interestingly enough, lots of communities or countries who are starting to open up are finding ways of the contact tracing. And some in Germany, for instance, I was on a webinar with German superintendents, and as they were opening in their schools. Now, mind you, they're not public schools. These were private independent schools. But what was happening was teachers were actually photographing each class, taking a snapshot. So they had a record of exactly where kids were sitting and who they were next to and how far apart they were. So we will have to develop certainly a contact tracing mechanism. And again, we hope there's some guidelines coming from the state level. My child is struggling with online learning, as is mine. I'm not going to lie to you there. I have one student who's on an IEP, and it is a struggle. Needs more interaction with teachers. If school is all remote in the fall, how can situations like this be addressed? As I said before, I think we need to certainly increase our contact with kids through synchronous learning, meaning live options. I am very fearful of having kids in front of screens all day. It's just a struggle. It's not good for kids. We know that. But how do we continue to learn? We've had some students where we just provide paper because we find it's the best approach for that one child instead of being on a computer. Will students in the SPED sub-separates go to school every week as they are already in smaller classes? Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've written down and wrote to myself saying, I think those classrooms should be in every day, every week. And that being said, how do we get our students there? A lot of our students in those classrooms take separate transportation, and can we have one or two students in a bus or not? Those are good questions, but I hope we can actually have our most the populations that needs to be in school every day. We hope we can get them in there, because you're right, naturally those are small classrooms to begin with, and we can spread out. My child will be a high school freshman next year. How can he be prepared? I've tried equating this to when I was a principal, and thinking about children who come in to our system from other systems, and where we are typically known to have a really strong high school in terms of the academics. And when kids come into our district from another state where the standards and the frameworks are not as rigorous as what we have in Massachusetts, we have to get those students up to speed. And so we will continue to assess our students. We still have frameworks that we have to follow, and we will be focused on making sure that the gaps that are naturally occurring right now, that we're closing those first. It may take us, we're not going to do it in 6 months. It may take us as a freshman. It may take us till the middle of the sophomore year. So we know that we've got those gaps closed. That will certainly be something that we will continually assess the children as they come in. I'm concerned. I'll be up front as a parent. As I said, I have a 7th grader who is on an IEP, and he has struggled with the entire remote learning, and he's had zero direct teaching from his school district, from the teachers. It's all been asynchronous, so all taped, and he struggled with it. And I'm worried that his skills certainly have not gotten any stronger. So all I can do is hope that we continue to assess him and assess our kids more often, and then make plans to close those gaps. Thank you for the comment, Kim. I appreciate that. Is it possible elementary schools will not have outside playtime? Is it possible? I think anything is possible, but I believe that our kids need to get some fresh air. It's how it's done is what will be the work of the task force, right? So maybe, Ms. Connor's class at Mendez, no longer Ms. Connor's, but I'm using it. Ms. Connor's class will be only outside for their recess together. So you're keeping the cohorts of kids together, if you will, right? So limiting exposure to other kids and other teachers. I think that's going to be the trick. In foreign countries, Denmark, et cetera, where we've seen schools opening, our kids need to be outside. They need to get that playtime. They need the recess, but how we do it is what's going to be critically important. Are there plans for remediation at the start of the school year to make up for these last few months? How will elementary students be evaluated on their mastery of skills that should have been learned this year? Great question. We will be working with our teaching staff to find a way to assess our kids at the beginning. Like I said before, if we could find a way to get in earlier and have it negotiated within our teaching units, to have our students tested to see where they are and they land in terms of their skills, then we will continue to do that, and we'll work towards doing that. We don't have the ability to get into our buildings with kids yet. That's first and foremost. But we will, the first couple weeks will be about assessment of where kids are, and that's important. Secondly, I've been advocating, and I've been shot down twice, more than twice. I've been advocating that we think about next year not having the MCAS again at all grade levels in order to get 10, 15 more teaching days back in, because we spend a lot of time just in the preparation, like the actual taking of the exams, or the MCAS exams, the setup, the trial with the Chromebooks, all of these things. I would like to see us be able to gather some of those days back to close gaps. But there are logistics. We receive federal funds. The federal government has to waive the accountability structure, which they did this year. And then MCAS is actually a legal requirement by the state of Massachusetts, and that would have to be amended again. It was this year for just this year. And the Commissioner of Education does not have control of that. So we will wait and see. But that question's been asked numerous times of the Commissioner, that if we would consider getting some days back for MCAS. With the idea of limited travel between classes and small groups staying in one classroom, how does this impact children with special needs that have inclusion needs as a part, right? So it's not going to work out beautifully. And that's what I said before. We will have to figure out, we want our kids, if you know me well enough in terms of what I've said, I believe in inclusion. And I think our students benefit greatly being in inclusion classrooms. So but sometimes they have to be pulled out for extra support. How do we identify the kids, and are we able to provide the additional support outside, but then push them back into the classroom? it'll be a thoughtful approach for sure. But the idea would be, yes, we need to continue with the inclusion model and allow for the supports outside. Maybe the supports are a separate time of day, and you just stay within the inclusion process. I don't know that. I'm just saying we'll be considering all of these. Also been on the volunteering opportunities with the current situation. Yeah, a lot of recommendations are from the volunteering is that we no longer allow volunteers in the buildings. We have yet to make any determinant there, but that has been the guidance where I've read probably, I think I'm up to 8 different states now. I've read their opening plans, and every single one of them has identified for this upcoming year, no parent volunteers coming into the schools. So, and same with field trips, not having exterior field trips out of the, not out of state, but even in state, not having those. As it relates to splitting up, rotating in smaller classes for contact tracing and limiting exposures, what about the kids that need before and after care and are in multiple care settings due to parents, right? We've been thinking long and hard about, or I have been, our extended day programs and the needs for our kids to be able to access those and our families to access those so our students and our families can go back to work. We're going to have to work across all of these domains with private caregivers, with our Board of Health, in order to identify students who may come in contact. You've got in Ashland, you may have, a child care center that's got students coming and families dropping off from 6 different towns locally, right? I mean, Dover, Sherburne, Holliston, Hopkinton, Ashland, Framingham, they can all go into one of our local child care centers. And how are we going to trace that? I'm not sure. I don't think we have the capacity in the Ashland Public Schools to create a larger aftercare program than what we have now. Ms. Mercon-Smith does a phenomenal job with EDP, but if we're going to be limiting her ability to have more kids, what are we going to do? It's about space as well. What's the thought process around changes in staffing needs for a different model? Presumably there might be a greater need for technical staff or even teachers' assistants versus potentially certain specials. Budget is certainly a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge. There's a lot of uncertainty for sure with the budget and with the model. And I don't want to sit here and presume to know what it's going to look like. The state budget will come out probably at the end of July, and we'll have a much clearer idea of what and how it will impact our schools, excuse me. So currently we're proceeding with a budget that was passed last Wednesday at the school committee meeting that actually included a $700,000 cut from the original budget that was passed in March or early March. And that budget does not cut any of our teaching staff or our paraprofessionals, nursing, custodial, et cetera. So it's a budget that keeps all of those employees in our system. So, but we're working towards having conversations that no employees will have any raises next year as well. So that was rolled into how we were able to cut our $700,000. So we will continue to monitor it and make changes as necessary. We have about 100 paraprofessionals across the district, and how we deploy them will be very different in the future, for sure. We're all waiting for a vaccine. However, effective treatment options are more likely to be found sooner. In lieu of vaccine, how impactful would effective treatment be on returning things back to normal? Great question. Again, as I said, I do not work in isolation, and I cannot sit here before you and in good conscience say, hey, we're opening up schools full bore. I don't have that authority, and we will be cautious with our approach, but understanding our approach is we want to be in school, and we're going to do everything we can to have our kids in our buildings, and we will follow that guidance. NHS and community service requirements, we will continue to visit those at the high school level. As you know, this year, the school committee did waive the community service requirements for graduating seniors because not everyone was able to finalize and get all the paperwork in. My guess is we'll continue to have those conversations with Ms. St. Kerr and the site council at the high school level, and the teaching staff and the National Honor Society folks. What can parents do to help? Again, I think ask really good questions, continue to ask the questions, provide input, be engaged with us, and, you know, understand that it's not going to be perfect. And we, as a school community, want your children in school. We do, but we will not take a risk of health and safety as directed by the Department of Public Health, our local Board of Health, and recommendations by the governor and the commissioner. Many people are not social distancing, understood. Maybe people need to hear this will delay us returning to normal. I think we need to continue to emphasize it as community members. And when you see folks, I think it's important to, you know, have that conversation within our own households and address it. I think every single week, the nurses, they send me a note to put in my weekly email. I believe every single note that they've sent me since we've closed continues to mention the importance of social distancing and reducing the spread. Will the Mendez construction project be delayed? This is the one where the school received a large grant. Right. So we are still on tap for the Mendez building project. The next opportunity for the community to have a voice in terms of the funding would be in the fall, in November, at the town meeting in November. So we are currently still on pace to have that conversation as a community. And we've been meeting with the Massachusetts School Building Authority throughout this entire time. We had a meeting last week. My weeks blend together like yours do. And we are still on pace to have this project be presented to our community. So yes, we are addressing lunch. That's a great question. Lisa Bowden, our Director of Student Nutrition Services, is on the task force. And she is absolutely an advocate for lunch and our healthy eating habits, as well as making sure that we're doing everything we can to provide a safe environment for our kids. Again, there are so many different recommendations, whether it's having kids eat in classrooms. I worry about, obviously, allergies, worry about more refuse in the classrooms, things of that nature. But those will be all things discussed. Would Kathy Silva be willing to have a meeting with parents who have children on IEPs? We have many concerns and questions for our unique learners, and hearing from her directly would be really helpful. I will absolutely speak to her, and I'm sure she would be glad to. Has there been any discussion around summer learning opportunities for children in order to maintain momentum and keep kids engaged? There has been, and we're still waiting. So the guidance just came out, I think, yesterday on camps and from the early, local camps. And that guidance is helping inform the summer plans that the commissioner will be putting out in the next couple of days. And that might help us determine what can we do in the summer in terms of creating opportunities for our kids to, I don't want to say maintain momentum, I want to say gain momentum, and then get them engaged to some degree. That's the Title I camps, our extended school year programs, et cetera. So we will continue to look at that. It would certainly be not optimal, but given how much more independent older learners can be in general, I've heard of other towns considering having middle school and high school level be fully remote in the fall. Let me be clear. I know what other towns are talking about. The commissioner was really explicit today. The Commonwealth will have a model that they are expecting 90%, 85 to 90% of the districts to follow. And that the deviation will be very small for districts. We will not be in that comparison mode. And that's what we'll have to follow. Any idea at the elementary level when children will find out their teachers? Yeah, this was a conversation had today as well. We're holding off on that for a little bit, only because we don't know um, what it's going to look like in terms of the actual classroom experience. Um, I do think it's important to greet the new teacher, even if it's in Zoom. And there's normally a step up day. So I will bring that back to the administrative team. It's a great question. You know, Claudia's on here and a couple of the other principals are on this call as well. And let's see if that's something that we can work through. How would it work for students who live in towns outside of Ashland, especially if that community had a higher number? So yeah, so we have a number of students who school choice in. Again, if a student is not feeling well, if a student has symptoms, they need to stay home. Otherwise, they are students of ours and they'll be coming to school. We just need to ensure that, you know, that contact tracing is going to be important. I'm concerned on SAT and ICT in the future and how to prepare for college readiness. Again, I won't go into my my own beliefs about SAT and ACTs because I don't think they're necessarily great barometers for college readiness. It is a measure, but it's not the all end and be end all. Many universities and colleges will actually be looking at not using SAT and ACTs in the future because of this. But that being said, I do believe that our kids will be prepared and we'll do the best we can to make sure that they're doing those things. I can tell you this, the AP exams this spring, it was really a challenge. My wife is an AP Spanish teacher, and the struggles that kids have actually taking the AP exams remotely, not being able to submit their work. In many cases, even in Ashland, we had students that struggled with it. I wish the AP had just paused this year, but they didn't, and we'll see what happens. If a student is in daycare during remote learning weeks, won't that cause more exposure? Potentially, yes. Do we have a timeline associated with how schools will open in the fall? When will all the options transition to a plan? My goal is that by mid-July, we have a plan in place. That being said, it's dependent upon the information we get from the state level and the commissioner's office. As I stated, the commissioner will be providing draft documents and guidance to superintendents the week of June 15th to the 18th. That will be able to again review. I can start looking at that and how it compares to the framework that we're trying to create within my working group, and then decipher it and push it out to the folks at the school level. Considering that this is such a volatile situation and things can change anytime, presume we're going to have a backup plans in case we have to fall back. Absolutely. Vizzy, we're going to have probably plan A, B, C, D, E, and F. In light of need to keep kids from home if they feel unwell, will attendance policies change? Or yes, absolutely, we have to look at that, and we will continue to modify that. We've actually asked the state to think about, as you know, part of the you may not, but part of our accountability structure in the state is based on attendance, and the more students are absent, it actually impacts our rating as a school district, which to me is I really struggle with. But that being said, with COVID-19, how are we going to address these issues with our students? And we do have to look at the policy. I think a really positive thing that came out of the remote learning is I do believe a lot of our teachers are going to be more, they're going to be more ready to provide online learning opportunities for our kids and more robust learning opportunities. So, but looking at those policies is certainly something we'll be doing. Will there be a detailed plan by grade level on how the academic acts will be addressed in the fall, especially at the elementary level? Their learning is key with basic things that they memorize, like multiplication. How exactly will these key core areas miss instruction be taught? Again, yes, there will be more detailed by building. My framework will be that we're working on will be just that, a framework for each building to get into the weeds, if you will, or to identify the ways to close these gaps, identify the gaps. So yes, we'll be working through that. Appreciate all that you're doing to help our kids. No one could have been prepared going forward. Safety, thank you, Busy. Will EDP be impacted, and can the program continue? Ms. Mercon-Smith is part of the working group as well. So we love EDP, and we will continue to find ways to keep EDP moving and going forward. Will volunteer requirements for rising seniors be waived? Again, I mentioned that was the community service hours. We will continue to investigate and make those changes as necessary. School committee has always been, willing to look at those things. Will we be able temporarily be able to stop pullouts without risking the IEP if we want to do this? Again, I think that's a question that Kathy Silva. I apologize for my dog who's screaming in the background. We'll have to get Kathy involved in this question for sure. If parents decide not to send their children to school in the fall, will the school district provide virtual learning or other supports to the family? Would the family be on their own? No, we will certainly have a blended opportunity, a hybrid model. We recognize the fact that many kids and families may decide to keep their children home. We will find a way to make sure that we're working with those families. If MCAS is not required for my child, will they miss out on the earning free state college tuition awards? Good question. If it's not required, the state is actually looking. So I'll give an example. So currently the state decided, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, this has just happened last week. The state decided that the current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors in high school are not going to be required to take the MCAS in the sciences. That being said, the Abigail Scholarship and some of the MCAS-related tuitions at the local state universities are impacted by that, right? So they are actually finding and working through that at the state level to determine if MCAS is not required, how do they then still afford families the opportunity through the Abigail Scholarship Foundation, Abigail Adams Scholarship Foundation. So they're looking at that at the state level. Amy, to answer that question. There will be plenty of districts opening schools in other parts of the country before mesh. Correct. Do you know if the commissioners will follow any protocols that work successfully? Yes. I think that's part of the reason why the commissioner is taking and the governor has taken such a measured approach. Some may use a different word. I'm going to use measured. Is because we are looking at how other states are opening and what's working and what's not working in other parts of the country. So the answer is yes, they are taking that into consideration. I can't imagine how hard this has been and appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn. It's been challenging for everyone, not just administrators, teachers, parents, it's the whole community. It's been certainly a challenging time for each and every one of us. And I can certainly empathize with many of you as having my kids at home doing remote learning as well, and myself and my wife trying to work. Has there been any discussion from the commissioner to pushing back the school year altogether, maybe starting? No. Interesting thought, and maybe it's something I will actually send out. The concern, the most recent concern question was, would he be considering changing the requirements of 180 school days? Which again is a legal requirement. So any of these conversations, I think will get pushed back from a from a legislative standpoint. But I certainly can bring that up. What will kindergarten look like? Good question. We don't know yet how it's going to pan out. I think for each of our buildings, that's where we'll get into more specific. things. +1 to comment and support. Thank you for this information. Effort. Thank you. Everyone's working hard at it. Jen, thank you for sharing your concerns with the parent of a student on IEP. It makes me feel less alone. Absolutely. We all have concern. As I said, I'm concerned for my own child and how that's going to work out. I assume you're considering children playing with each other outside of school, so keeping cohorts together in school will be undermined. Absolutely. Listen, they're going to go play sports and team sports, and there has to be some sort of thoughtful, conscious effort by community members, families, parents, youth sports to limit the amount of social interaction. That's all I can say. We can do our part within the schools, and we can set up a framework, and we can set up a schedule. So we're practicing that within the school setting, but when they leave our buildings, we don't have that control. And hopefully that's something parents will take responsibility for. Is there something parents can do to try and get MCAS to not happen next year? Do parents need to voice it? Yeah, I think anytime you want to reach out to Senator Spilka or Representative Lewis in their offices and talk about the concerns you have with it, have at it. I do it all the time. Thank you for keeping us involved. You're welcome, Ruchi. Will there be another info session for parents of special needs students? I'm going to actually have, that question was asked earlier. I'm going to see if Kathy Silva will have a separate session. I think it's certainly worthwhile. Some of the virtual learning apps that the school district offered parents for free this spring were great. Will we continue to have access to these apps? We will check into that. I will check with our IT. That's a question that was actually a hard copy, so I do have that, and hopefully I can get that answered for folks. Liz, as a teacher myself and someone with a child who will be at Mendez next year, I totally understand your support and concern. Thank you. I believe Kathy Silva has a meeting tomorrow to discuss summer learning. Excellent. Is there any chance of younger kids getting the same teacher again next year? If not, if we're not back in person for consistency. So that term, I'll use the education term, looping. So you have the same teacher from year to year. So there's that consistency. It won't necessarily work. So our 5th grade teachers, those students are moving to the 6th grade, 8th grade moving to the 9th grade. So there's always going to be a gap in there somewhere right now because we don't do looping. We've talked about potentially having opportunities for kids to go back and have some sort of closure with those educators, but we don't know what that looks like. Like I said, you've got your 4th grade and your 3rd grade at the Mendez, you get 3rd and 4th grade. So now the new 3rd grade, you got 5th grade teachers who are used to teaching 5th grade. Do they have to go down and teach the 3rd grade? So there's a curriculum issue as well. Some people already send children to school when they're ill. Yep. The same will happen with this, with more understood. Again, we can only control what we can control. I hope as a superintendent realize that the remote learning plans that teachers submitting take a tremendous amount of technology know-how and teachers learning every day. Absolutely. I've been pretty consistent in my messaging about how proud I am of our staff and how much work it takes. Like I said, I see it every single day in my house. My wife is a teacher, is a high school teacher. I know how hard she's worked. I believe she's working exponentially harder in creating plans and working with her students remotely. I see it every day, and I respect the heck out of everything that the teachers are doing. Will temps be taken before entering school? I think that's going to probably fall upon families to make sure that they're doing those things. Yes, disinfectant stations. We are in the process of looking at getting all of the proper equipment, supplies that we need, whether it's hand sanitizer, soaping dispensers, more mobile hand washing carts, especially for the elementary levels, things of that nature. Thank you, Claudia, for this informative session. Looking forward to send my word to school, since no matter what, a good teacher mentor cannot replace reading a million books or remote learning. Thank you, Sana. that was a lot of stuff tonight, and I probably went through it really quickly. Thank goodness it's being recorded by WACA-TV. It looks like my recording stopped because, no, maybe it didn't. Maybe it's still going. You're very welcome for the support. Absolutely. So great job to all the parents trying to work absolutely from home and homeschool their children. Some are single parents or in unique situations, and some houses have limited. I couldn't agree more. This is part of the reason we took the approach we took this year during this time period. We have to recognize the fact that not everyone has the wherewithal to have remote learning. Many of our students are working and are providers for their homes, and to have those expectations that every child is going to be sitting in front of a computer and getting rigorous coursework throughout the day is not realistic. And yes, we can create opportunities that for those students to learn, and that's where the asynchronous learning was the focus of the commissioner. So not as much live information, but taped. So thank you for that comment, and we do recognize it. So I guess it's 8:22. If there are no more questions, I will again focus on getting this information posted online. Excuse me. And we will have another one of these dialogues. Hopefully this worked for you, and you're able to get some of the questions answered, and go from there. And feel free to jump in the next 2 sessions. And like I said, I will have more of these in the future. Would we consider rotating teachers instead of students in the AMS? Absolutely, yes. So if you mean keeping students in a classroom and then rotating teachers through, yeah, that's being done in other parts of the world. And we talked about that today. The problem is not every child. So you could have a class of 15 kids, and they may be in the same English and history level at the high school, but their math and their sciences may be totally different. You might have a child in an honors class for math and science, but not in an honors class for history and science, or for history and English. So those kids still have to go somewhere. So looking at those schedules is really quite challenging. Little easier probably at the middle school based on teaming. Absolutely, it's a tough time for all of us. Will Pitaway still have half-day options with 2 classes utilizing? Sarah and I started that conversation today. I don't have an answer for you. And again, that'll be building specific. I will say this, what I'm asking our custodial staff to do is, because I'm such a visual person and learner, over the next few days, they're setting up socially distanced classrooms for me to go in and look at in each building, 2 separate classrooms. I want to see what it looks like in each building, to see how many kids we really can get in the classroom and what it would look like. And I'll be interested to see, can we, what can we do? And again, we want as many kids as we can within the buildings while keeping everyone safe. Okay. Thank you again. Claudia, thank you so much for working and doing all the Q&A information for me. Connor, WACA, I think we're going to be done here, and I appreciate WACA in their continued support of the Ashland Public Schools and in the community for hosting this. This will be on the education channel as well, so it'll be played again. Again, thank you so much. It looks like I have 2 raised hands. I don't know where. Let me get my list. And I'm looking at the poll. Thank you. It really split. Great. Warren, Mendez, Ashland, and the middle school, really high percentages. So that's great, folks, tonight. Let me see, close that. And let's see, Claudia. Let's close the question and answers. Somebody had some hands up. Judy and Gail, do you have questions, or I unmuted you if you want to. Nope, hold on. Or you can put your hand down if you're all set. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for your time tonight and for sharing what you know so far. You're welcome. And thank you for your questions, Julie. I know you sent some stuff to me personally, and I appreciate it. Okay. Well, thank you, folks, and we will see you soon. Stay safe.